The FIFA World Cup is watched by more humans than any other event in history. More than the Olympics, more than any election, more than any war broadcast. 4 billion people, more than half the planet, all watching a game that was invented by accident, stolen multiple times, and almost banned by 3 different governments before it took over the world. Nobody planned for this, and the story of how a ball and a patch of grass became the single most watched thing in human history is stranger, older, and more violent than anything happening on the pitch today. Start with the ball itself, not the modern one, the first one. In 1969, archaeologists excavating a site in Mesoamerica found a rubber ball buried in a ritual deposit. It was dated to around 1600 BCE. That is 3,500 years ago. The people who made it belonged to the Olmec civilization, one of the earliest complex societies in the Americas. They had figured out how to extract latex from rubber trees, process it, and shape it into a bouncing sphere. Nobody else on Earth had done this yet, and they were using it to play a game. The Mesoamerican ball game is the oldest known sport in human history. It was played across a stone court shaped like a capital I, with sloping walls on either side. Players could not use their hands. They moved the ball using their hips, knees, and elbows. The objective varied by region and era, but in many versions, the goal was to pass a stone ring mounted high on the wall, roughly the equivalent of a modern goal, except vertical and 3 meters off the ground. It sounds like football. It was not football. But it was something close enough that when Spanish conquistadors arrived in the 16th century and watched a game, they could not believe what they were seeing. One of Hernán Cortés's soldiers wrote back to Spain describing a ball that bounced higher than any ball in Europe, and a game he had never seen anything like. He was right. Nothing like it existed in Europe yet. The ball game was also religious. In many Mesoamerican cultures, the court represented the underworld. The ball represented the sun. The movement of the ball across the court was a ritual reenactment of the sun's journey through the sky. And in some versions of the game, at some points in history, the losing team was sacrificed. Not the winners, the losers. Some researchers argue it was the captains only. Some argue it happened rarely. The carvings on the walls of the courts do not fully agree with each other. What they do agree on is that the stakes were occasionally higher than a yellow card. On the other side of the planet, at roughly the same time, a completely different version of the game was developing in China. Cuju, which translates roughly as kickball, is documented in Chinese military manuals from the Song Dynasty, around 200 BCE. Soldiers played it as physical training. The ball was a leather casing stuffed with feathers and hair. The goal was a hole in a silk net stretched between 2 bamboo poles. You had to kick the ball through it without using your hands. That is football. That is the basic definition of football, written down 2,000 years before the Football Association existed. Cuju spread through Chinese society rapidly. It moved from military training to courtly entertainment to popular street game within a few centuries. By the Song Dynasty, around 600 CE, there are records of women playing it. By the Song Dynasty, there were professional players. There were leagues. There were star players whose names were recorded. There was a governing body that set the rules. The Chinese had professional football leagues 1,000 years before England claimed to have invented the game. Meanwhile, in England, something else entirely was happening. Medieval folk football had no teams in any meaningful sense. It had no fixed number of players. It had no pitch, no referee, no rules beyond a vague agreement about where the ball had to end up. It was played between entire villages, hundreds of people, sometimes thousands. The ball, a pig's bladder usually, had to be carried or kicked from one end of the village territory to the other. Games lasted all day. They ran through streets, across fields, through rivers. Property was destroyed. People were injured. People occasionally died. King Edward II banned it in 1314. He was worried about the noise disturbing the peace. It did not stop. Edward III banned it in 1349. He was worried it was distracting men from archery practice. It did not stop. Henry VIII banned it in 1540. Parliament banned it in 1835. None of it stopped. The English could not stop playing football even when their kings told them to. What eventually changed football was not a law. It was a school.
In the early 19th century, English public schools began codifying their own versions of the game. Rugby school allowed players to carry the ball. Eton banned carrying entirely. Harrow introduced a goal. Every school had slightly different rules, and when students went to university, they found they could not play together because nobody agreed on what the game actually was. So in October 1863, representatives from 12 London football clubs met at the Freemasons Tavern in London to agree on a single set of rules. They argued for 6 weeks. The most heated debate was about hacking, whether players should be allowed to kick each other in the shins. The pro-hacking faction argued that without the threat of physical pain, the game would lose its character and attract only weaklings. They were outvoted. The anti-hacking clubs formed the Football Association. The pro-hacking clubs eventually went their own way and formed what would become rugby. That argument in a pub in 1863 is the moment football and rugby became two different sports. The Football Association wrote down 17 rules. They are still recognizable today. But the game still had to get out of England. It spread the way almost everything spread in the 19th century, through trade, through empire, through sailors, and merchants and engineers carrying their habits with them across the world. British workers building railways in Argentina played on the grass beside the tracks. British sailors in Brazil kicked balls on the docks between ships. British merchants in Spain formed the first clubs on the Iberian Peninsula.
In every country it landed, it did the same thing. It started as a foreign curiosity. It became a local obsession. And then it became something that felt like it had always been there. By the time FIFA was founded in Paris in 1904, 7 countries signed the founding documents. Today, FIFA has more member nations than the United Nations. Football did not just spread. It did something no empire, no religion, no language ever fully managed. It became genuinely universal. Which brings us back to the 4 billion. When Pelé scored his 1,000th career goal in 1969, the match was stopped so the crowd could applaud. When Diego Maradona scored the Hand of God in 1986, a nation felt it as a political act. When Andres Iniesta scored the winning goal of the 2010 World Cup final, he lifted his shirt to reveal a message for a teammate who had died that year. The stadium fell quiet for a moment before it erupted. These are not sports moments. They are human moments that happen to take place on a football pitch. The game that began as a rubber ball in an Olmec ritual deposit traveled through Chinese military training, survived English kings, split in a London pub, and sailed across the world on merchant ships. That game is now the common language of 4 billion people who share almost nothing else. No other sport came close. No other game got there. The question worth sitting with is not why football became the most watched thing in history. The question is what that tells us about what humans actually need. Not the game, what the game provides. A shared language that needs no translation. A reason to care about the same thing at the same time. A way to belong to something larger than yourself without giving up what makes you different. The ball has been rolling for 3,500 years. It has never really stopped. And every 4 years, 4 billion people prove that it never will.